Do you think the sequel to Daybreak will come out later in 2024 or same time in 2025? Probably 2025. I don't think we'll get the sequel the same year. I don't think so. And besides, it will be fucking stupid if NIS America did that. It's not good, you know. I think that's a really long game. It's gonna be a long as fuck game, and it's gonna take several months for a lot of people to finish. I know for a fact I'm gonna get beat in like 3 weeks because this is what I do for a living and because I love JRPGs. But I think they're gonna do the same they did with Zero and Azure. You know how Zero came out in October and then Azure on March? So if Daybreak is going to come out in July, probably. Well, they haven't set a date. They just said summer of 2024. Yeah, we'll probably get part 2 in January, maybe. But then again, East 10. What's gonna happen with that? I mean, they gotta localize that too, right? Who knows when we'll get Trails Through Daybreak Part 2. What does it take for game developers to focus more on game mechanics rather than graphics? I don't know, man. I think what they need to do is make the games by themselves and forget about those fucking executives trying to focus everything on open world games, free-to-play games, graphic horrors. You know, I think it's just what the world needs right now is to get rid of those fucking people like Yoshi P. Those guys need to die, need to go away. Go away. And people with a brain, you know, need to step in. That's what needs to happen. What games do you consider part of the second golden age? Oh, that I was talking about? Oof. Well, I think it all came about when games like Tales of Berseria, Persona 5, Nier Automata came out. I mean, those kind of like made a huge impact in the industry, right? That's when, in my opinion, the second golden age started. You know, it kind of started for me before that with games like Radiant Historia, Devil Survivor, Tales of Exilia. You know, most of them were kind of overlooked back then. They didn't become popular until much later. But in my opinion, you know, as soon as 2017, I think 2017 was like the year. 2017 is like, it was like the equivalent of 1995. You know, when everybody realized that JRPGs was the shit and they were great. Chrono Trigger, Super Mario RPG, Final Fantasy VI, and then Final Fantasy VII, and then Xenogears, Suikoden 2, and then Chrono Cross, and then the PlayStation 2 era came about. So yeah, so I'd say, you know, we started getting, I think we entered the second golden age like in the early 2010s, and then when 2017 hit and Persona 5 came out and Nier Automata came out and both games sold millions of copies in 1 year, that to me was like the revival of the genre. Like, it became mainstream once again, more so than ever. So there you go. That was like the games that really extremely popularized the genre. I have read your book, and I see you have a lot of experience about the world building and storytelling. Thanks, man. Can you share a little bit about that? Okay, you definitely need some kind of influence, some kind of inspiration, like I did with you're talking about Terra Gaiden or the Revenant Army? Like, what book are you talking about? I have like 10 books, man. But the world building differs from story to story. It's kind of different. For example, in books like Nyx Inferno, there's not really a necessity for world building. More like you need to start. I started from scratch, developing a world that was already there, which is the real world, and then, you know, start not exactly building it, more like destroying it from there. So it's different. But in books like the Revenant Army, that's the one you read. Okay, so the Revenant Army, that's inspired by Suikoden and Fire Emblem. So obviously I needed some kind of inspiration for that. So what I did was sit down and think it through before starting to write. I'm the type of writer who usually just sits down and writes. and I just let my imagination flow as I advance, and then I start correcting things. Once I'm far into the book and I'm almost on the last chapters, that's when I start saying, oh, this doesn't make any sense. Or if I'm gonna write this, I'm gonna have to go back and correct this, right? But my world building usually comes from before that, from when I have an idea. Usually it happens during the first chapters of the book, because what comes to me first, it's an idea. Like I want to write a story about this, and that, and that's it. So as soon as I start writing the first 2 chapters, I'm already developing the world. Like I think it's a necessity for me, to start adding dialogue, to start like having the characters from the first chapters interact, and then so this is what's gonna happen. So I don't want to spoil anything, but to give you an example, something really bad happens during during chapter 2 of the Revenant Army, something horrible. And when I planned that, I was like, okay, so where am I going to go from there? I'm gonna do this plot twist, this massive plot twist in there, shocking plot twist, and then I'm gonna go from there, right? So I'm gonna go to the soldiers part. I'm gonna go with my protagonist, Orion, and that's when it hit me. That's when the Fire Emblem and Suikoden influence hit me. I was like, man, this guy needs to go through this ordeal to build an army, to gather allies, and fight the Empire. So what's the world gonna be like? Oh, it's gonna be like this. And I actually drew a map. I don't know if I can find it. Let me take a look. If I have it on this computer, to show you the Revenant Army map that I drew. And I was like, man, this is gonna be the world, and this continent is gonna be like this city is gonna be like that, and the commerce and the whatnot, I didn't focus too much on the world building because I think that's something that you appreciate more in movies or in video games, not so much as in reading. But I also think there's a lot of people who do like that stuff, the world building, like a lot of explanation on the world building itself and the lore and whatnot. That wasn't the case for me with that book. Well, that's my answer. I usually do the world building. I think about the world I'm going to set my characters in before starting to write the book. Right? I start developing it as I write the book. That's how I do it. I read chapter 3 and man, I have to draw the whole map myself. I can't remember it all. Thank you, Hooflong128. You leave Tales of Berseria. You love Tales of Berseria. Yes, I fucking do. Could you go over some of the points between that game and the other entries such as Abyss, Symphonia, and Graces? Sure. I think Berseria... Okay, so you mentioned Abyss, Symphonia, and Graces. Those are different games. Abyss was more on the Symphonia side of things. The battle system was very similar. It kind of felt like a small evolution. Symphonia had a great battle system, but Abyss did it better. But then Graces happened, which was very different, very unique. Like, what the hell were they trying to do? It wasn't just random hack and slash and guarding and evading and running around. No, Graces was more like knowing how to approach your enemy and what combos to use and what combination of attacks to use. So it was a primitive idea, not primitive as in bad. It was a pretty original approach to the series, and they wanted to do something really hardcore, really difficult. And they succeeded. The game wasn't a huge success. Abyss and Symphonia were far more successful than Graces, but Graces succeeded nonetheless. But I think what the developers did with that battle system in Berseria was like, okay, we want to do something similar, but at the same time, we don't want it to be as hardcore and punishing and complicated as in Graces. So what they did with Berseria was take everything good about it and made it easier. And they also considered games like Abyss and Symphonia, but they probably thought, this is what I think happened, okay? This is just my theory, my hypothesis, not even a theory. That they also said, okay, so we want to do something like in Graces, but we also want to do something like in Abyss or Symphonia. And they just merged both of them. And the result was a battle system that can be technical if you want it to be, but also you can just button mash your way through. And Berseria ended up being one of those divisive games that a lot of people think is stupidly easy, and others think it's stupidly hard. So it's one of those games, right? To me, it's in the middle. It's not easy, nor is it hard. But to me, personally, it is a little bit more leaning towards the easy side of things. But you gotta know how to control the characters, which one to control better. And Velvet, the protagonist, is broken. I mean, she's broken. You can just beat the game on easy or normal mode with her, and you're barely gonna struggle. You will struggle, but barely. The bare minimum. So, they nailed it, in my opinion. A lot of people criticize the battle system of that game, but in my opinion, they fucking nailed it. That was what Graces was probably trying to achieve. Not that there's anything wrong with the battle system in Graces, it's pretty fantastic, but it is a pretty hard game, unlike Berseria, right? So, I love Berseria, man. I love it. One of the reasons why I love the game so much is precisely because of that. Because the combat felt like a true evolution from all of those previous entries combined together. Is the main character in the next installment still going to be jailed for someone by someone in the early game? Something kind of weird happens in Symphonia 2, okay? Yeah, but I'm not gonna say much beyond that. Play it. So you've gotten from Fantasia to Symphonia. Next is Legendia, right? No, well, yeah! Actually! Yeah. The main character ends up being jailed by someone in Legendia. At the beginning, yeah. And then next is the Abyss. And I don't remember that happening. No jail. Wait a second, maybe... Well, it's not the same. But yeah, Legendia, definitely. Speaking about Berseria, you're right. I never noticed that before, you know, that... I never noticed that until you mentioned it. A lot of Tales games, someone ends up in jail at some point, or the protagonist, or they're already in jail, like Tales of Arise. Alphen is pretty much a slave. That's a ginormous jail, right? And then, yeah, Berseria, of course, Velvet ends up in jail for 3 years. Holy shit. But then there are others that don't. Graces, for example, I do not remember anybody getting in jail. Could be wrong, though. Exilia. Exilia 2, someone, the protagonist, almost ends up in jail. Because he owes a lot of money to the hospital thanks to this fucking guy. He could have ended up in jail. But no, he didn't. But yeah, a lot of Tales games have this someone and the protagonist ends up in jail at some point. That's funny, man. That's funny. Thoughts on Labyrinth of Refrain and its sequel called Labyrinth of Galeria? I haven't played Galeria. Refrain is pretty good. I never finished it because dungeon crawl is in first person and me, we don't seem to get along. But I remember playing the game for a few hours. I think it was like 4 hours. And so I didn't get very far. But I liked what little I played. There's some controversial stuff in there, some mature stuff. A lot of sexualization, and I like the fact that you can. There's a lot of. The gameplay in that. You know how dungeon crawlers in first person, most of them are fucking monotonous, right? They're very repetitive. Well, this game is no exception, but there's more variety of gameplay mechanics. Sometimes you can jump, and you gotta solve the puzzles here and there, and the encounter rate isn't that high, and there's a lot to do with the story. And the witch talking to you. So, yeah, there's more variety. It makes it less... It's one of the less tedious dungeon crawlers in first person that I played. So it's good. I do recommend it. But I haven't played the sequel, Galeria. Anyway, what's your favorite Shin Megami Tensei mainline game? And what do you think of the future of SMT? Interesting questions. The first one, what's my favorite? Mainline, it's gotta be Apocalypse. Definitely. Unless you don't count that as mainline, but it's still SMT4. It's like SMT4 Part 2. Definitely that. But if that doesn't count as mainline to you, well, SMT5 then. Definitely. The future. Well, Sega and Atlus are companies that are slowly starting to get a little bit political and politicized. So I do fear for the future of SMT. Unfortunately, we already saw a controversy with SMT5. The protagonist seemed kind of like, I talked about this before, how he seemed kind of weird. His design, he seemed a little bit on the androgynous side of things. But then again, that's always been Kaneko's style. That's the artist's style when designing characters. All of his characters, both male and female, are a bit androgynous. But this one in particular was kind of like different. It just seems like the future of the series is heading into a direction that's kind of uncertain. I mean, we know for a fact Persona is probably going to be political from now on. But SMT, I don't know what's going to happen. But it's usually... I mean, there's always a huge year gap of difference between each mainline entry. And SMT5 was just released a couple of years ago. I don't think we'll see SMT6 until like 2030. No, probably before that. Probably earlier than that. 2027, maybe 2028. Probably we'll see the next mainline SMT. Hopefully things will have calmed down by then. Hopefully there's not political bullshit anymore in video games, but I doubt it. So we'll see what happens. I do fear for the future of anything from Atlus, not just SMT or Persona, anything from those guys. It seems like the company is slowly starting to be run by these political garbage people. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully they won't touch SMT or it won't affect it that much. But yeah. Other than that, when it comes to battle mechanics and the summoning demons and stuff like that, the fusion, I don't think that's gonna change. That is the nature of the games and have been like that since the beginning. But we did see a change with Nocturne. The original SMT games were dungeon crawlers in first person. And the first several of them were like that until Nocturne came about. And the reason why Nocturne got rid of the dungeon crawling system is because apparently people in Japan were getting tired of it and were getting dizzy because of all the crawling in first person, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me because most dungeon crawlers in first person stayed in Japan and they are more successful in Japan than in the West. But whatever, it was a decision. So I'm not really scared. I don't think SMT6 is gonna be an action RPG. But I think it's gonna have to be a little bit different. But we'll see, right? I'm not really that scared gameplay-wise. I'm more scared in terms of characters and story. I don't know what direction the series is going to take after what we saw in 5. In 5 was alright, you know, it's just the main character seemed kind of like I don't know, man, kind of different. And the story was criticized. It was a good story. It was still a good story. I liked it, but there wasn't a lot of focus on the story, right? There was more focus on the gameplay for 5. So there sure are some concerns in terms of storytelling and character development for the future. We'll see. Anyway, in Trials of Cold Steel 1 through 4, who did you pick as Rain main romance? Laura, whatever you want to pronounce. Laura. I fucking love her. And she's a perfect match for Rin. I mean, they have so much in common, and they actually have opposing personalities, so they're kind of different in terms of personalities. But in terms of things in common, hobbies, and way of thinking, they're just a perfect couple. I just don't see Rin with Alisa. Okay, they're just too different, man. It's just not gonna work. If that was canon, they need to get fucking divorced. They're gonna end up getting a divorce sooner or later. Laura, I mean, she is, in my eyes, and I know it's the same in a lot of people's eyes, she's the true soulmate of Rin. They just make perfect sense as a couple, man. But yeah, there's a lot of innuendo between Rin and characters like Towa, for example, or Fie, which is weird. Towa also makes sense because they're different. They make up for each other's weaknesses and strengths, and they're a good couple too. But Laura is just like Man, that's a perfect couple right there. That's a weird opinion, man. It's your opinion and I respect that, but you felt like SMT5 tried to be a direct sequel to 3? Are you sure you're not getting influenced by all of those other YouTubers and influencers who trashed the story? SMT, Shin Megami Tensei is always the same, man. It's just like Star Ocean. The new game gets trashed and heavily criticized, and then the next one comes out and suddenly the previous one is a masterpiece. That happened with SMT. I remember when Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne came out in North America, it was heavily criticized. A lot of people loved it, sure, but a lot of people also trashed it. It was just too hard, the dungeons were tedious and boring, the storytelling, I remember the storytelling was like criticized. People were saying, well, because the storytelling is different in that game, there's not a lot of story focus in there, not a lot of character development, you have no party members except the demons who never talk or rarely talk. So there's not an interaction. It's not a traditional JRPG like Persona, right? With party members and the power of friendship and whatnot. SMT is different. And I remember it got a lot of criticism. And all of a sudden Shin Megami Tensei 4 on the 3DS came out. And 3 was a masterpiece. Wow, SMT4 is garbage, how dare you, it's just a ripoff, it's just too different, it's just, I don't know, side quests forced on you at the beginning, and blah blah blah, it sucks man, it's garbage, SM3 is a masterpiece. And then, time went on, Apocalypse came out, oh, it's just like Persona, what the hell, no, I can't believe it, man, these characters, what the fuck, what the hell were they thinking, what were they trying to do, gameplay-wise it's the same game, SMT4 is a masterpiece, and Apocalypse sucks, and now SMT5 comes out, and, oh, the story is boring, the character seems kind of like this, it's just too easy, oh, the open world, it's kind of like blah blah blah, Apocalypse is a masterpiece. Mark my words, when SMT6 comes out, SMT5 will all of a sudden be a masterpiece too. That's the SMT fandom for you.